Welcome to the Truth Over Comfort show. Today's returning guest is Matthew Hoh. I think I've lost count now. I think it's the eighth time or the ninth time. He's been on many times to discuss Afghanistan, Iraq, Israel, Ukraine, all the different side of things. The counter arguments of why Russia shouldn't have invaded Ukraine. We've done covered a lot. US obsession with Iran, very relevant, obviously, right now. But today is here to talk about Julian Assange. If you're like me, you know his name, but you might not know all the ins and outs of him, maybe to do with your age or just general following. But you've gone along with the stories throughout the years. But I've just thought it'd be a good idea with the recent plea deal Assange made, and now he's free. It was reported, but again lost within the Middle East and Israel and Lebanon and Gaza. So I thought it'd be good just to break down the recent plea deal, but kind of going back to Assange, Wikileaks, what it is, some of the information they've released over the years that is very important for journalism and public knowledge, hiding behind national security. So could you just, first of all, before we get to his arrest, him in the Ecuador, what's the word? Ecuadorian
embassy.
What's the word? Embassy, sorry. Completely blurred my mind there. We were literally talking about before the show. Could you just let people know who Assange is and WikiLeaks and how they kind of came to be such a public force for good?
Yeah, I think you have to go back and understand the context in which WikiLeaks begins. And this is a story 20 years old. And WikiLeaks becomes formalized around 06, 07. I'd have to look it up to give you an exact date, but that's about when WikiLeaks as an entity first emerges. And of course, their big stories come out later. But the idea is, I believe, rooted twofold. One, in this new technology we have with the internet 20 years ago, the promise of it, the ability for it to deliver transparency, the ability of it to deliver raw information, raw documents to people, not having to get your news, not having to get information, not having to get things given to you through a filter, right? And particularly through a media filter that has a bias and that has relationships, particularly with the government and corporations. And that leads into the second aspect of this, is the necessity of it, particularly following the Iraq War and the way the American and the British media, the Western media to a greater extent, but particularly the American and the British media, were full in on that war when it was clear that the war was a war built on lies. And so you have these two things. You have this new technology, and then you have the need for this type of transparency, this type of openness, this type of ability for people to have direct contact with information, particularly documents that come from the source. And this is kind of the milieu. This is kind of the environment in which WikiLeaks is born. And so Julian Assange starts WikiLeaks with that purpose in mind. This idea of direct media, this idea of providing to people the information that they need without a filter, without editorializing, without opinionizing, without selecting what should or should not be said, and allowing people to have access to that information fully and freely. Because the editorial stuff, the opinion stuff, that's all still available. The commentary, it's all still available. And I think people get frustrated today, even when you read an article and it talks about a letter, or it talks about a document, or it talks about a report, and there's no link in the article to it. So you're taking the word of, that maybe a really important article, or a really important report or a study just came out on whatever topic it is. And you're limited to understanding that report or study in a 700-word article, as opposed to like being given a direct link to that article so that you yourself can read it. I mean, we see that we have that frustration now, right? And so this is essentially, 18 or so years ago when Julian Assange starts WikiLeaks. This is the type of service that they're trying to provide. And quite clearly, quite understandably, the need for truth, the need for accountability to expose what's going on, so that people know what their governments and what corporations are actually doing, becomes the foundation of it, becomes its purpose, its mission. And then, so at first, many of the WikiLeaks documents refer to corporations. The first big government one is in 2008, 2009, the Guantanamo Bay files. And this provides all types of information with regards to the U.S. rendition program, U.S. torture program, the U.S. detention, indefinite detention programs, revolving around Guantanamo Bay. And this is really seen by many as a service, because it exposes the lies of the George W. Bush administration. And you hear it actually from both sides of the political aisle. What a great thing WikiLeaks is, in the sense that, letting people see what's actually happening. WikiLeaks continues on that path. And then in 2010 is where they become widely recognized. And this is also when the United States government really turns against them, as well as the rest of the American empire. And this is in the spring of 2010, April 2010, I believe, when they released the Collateral Murder video. And the Collateral Murder video is the video of 10, I believe, Iraqi civilians being gunned down and killed. A couple of children were also wounded by an American helicopter in Baghdad. And that really galvanizes public attention, both towards the war in Iraq, both towards the idea of WikiLeaks, but also too of this idea of what's going on over there. How come we're not seeing this? How come we have to have this, pseudo anonymous internet organization be the ones to tell us about us? Why isn't our media showing us these things? And then that summer, there are the Iraq war leaks. You have the Afghan leaks as well, and then after that you have Cablegate. Actually, I think the State Department cables were before that. I'm trying to remember off the top of my head. But anyway, but you have a series of releases that are massive in the scale of documentation coming out of the U.S. government relating to the wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, as well as just U.S. government activity around the world. And these expose a lot of illegal activities of the United States government, a lot of uncomfortable or inconvenient or awkward activities of the U.S. government, things that are, again, criminal, embarrassing. They established government's lying, on and on and on. And at that point is when the U.S. government starts going after Julian Assange in a manner to not just persecute and prosecute him, but to make an example to other media organizations out there not to follow his lead. And from them forward, you have, we can get into the various aspects, but for Julian Assange in particular, he leaves Paris. He's living in Paris in the summer of 2010 and goes to England. And then he is basically under either home arrest, in exile in the Ecuadorian embassy, or in Belmarsh prison for the next 14 years.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point about just releasing the documents in their raw form to read them, because as you said, you read an article and they talk about the documents or letters, whichever it may be, but just give you snippets of quotes and not actual access to it. And normally, you could say that's how they can control the narrative about it. They can leave sections out that gives you the full picture, but also more damning quotes. We always hear about national security, and you will see redacted documents, and the media kind of redacts these documents as well for them, where they don't release it all. I mean, one example we'll give, and this isn't necessarily the same as WikiLeaks, or where they've received documents from a Freedom of Information Act. There was the one with John Kerry where he's talking about the rise of ISIS, and this was I'm not sure who leaked it, but it wasn't. I'm not sure if the New York Times got it first. But what the New York Times did is they did an article where they have like the minute of each bit where he talks, and you go through the whole article and you listen to it and you read it, and that's fairly interesting. And then they just leave out the biggest bombshell. They literally had the bit before and after, because I went back and listened to the whole thing and paired it up with the New York Times to see where they was talking, and they skipped the bit where John Kerry says the reason that Putin and Russia came into the Syrian civil war was because of the rise of ISIS. And he says the US was watching ISIS grow. We thought we could manage it and use it as leverage to bring Assad to the negotiation table. But instead he went to Putin because ISIS was marching towards Damascus, the capital of Syria.
Michael, I mean, I think we've been putting an extraordinary amount of arms in, haven't we?
Yeah, and I have to say, as you said, it's a double-edged sword because you give people the ability to defend themselves, but when you pump more weapons into a situation like Syria, it doesn't end well for Syrians because there's always somebody else that's willing to pump more weapons in for the other side. The armed groups in Syria get a lot of support, not just from the United States, but from other partners. And we've never said that
Qatar, Russia, Qatar, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, huge amount of weapons coming in, huge amount of money.
But pumping weapons in causes someone else to pump more weapons in, and you end up with Aleppo.
I mean, the reason Russia came in is because ISIL was getting stronger. Daesh was threatening the possibility of going to Damascus and so forth. And that's why Russia came in, because they didn't want a Daesh government. And they supported Assad. And we know that this was growing. We were watching it. We saw that Daesh was growing in strength. And we thought Assad was threatened. We thought, however, we could probably manage, that Assad might then negotiate. Instead of negotiating, you got Assad. Now you got Putin to support him.
They left that out. That's like the most important bit. Forget the rest. That's the most important bit. And if you went to the New York Times article, you go, oh, no, they've got bits here, and they missed that out. So with WikiLeaks, they would have just released the whole tape. And then you can listen to it for yourself and, they maybe include that as well. So it's really frustrating with the mainstream media, the lack of sourcing they do. It's the same for alternative media. I think it's really important to link up your articles to the original source. Same, I find it quite frustrating when you read a book and in the notes section, the footnotes, it's just to the book, which has the quote they're referring to. They're like, oh, this author wrote this book, but he talks about that. I'm like, I don't care. I'm not going to read every book you tell me. I need, give me the primary source. So I think it's what you said there with WikiLeaks, just releasing it without the commentary. You can read it yourself, watch it, and then people will comment on it. So I think that is important, again, going forward. So again, just around WikiLeaks. So there's the debate. Is it journalism? Is it not? And can you just explain how originally, places like The Guardian, the New York Times worked happily with WikiLeaks and released, the information that they provided. So how does WikiLeaks work, for the layman? Is it you have an insider government source who then goes to WikiLeaks? They have, pass over the documents. They go through the bits which take out maybe like personal information, agents' names, things like that. And then it's released. So how does WikiLeaks do it? Are they this careless organization that just releases it all, doesn't matter what's in it, forget even general national security? How does WikiLeaks work with releasing the documents?
Right. And that's a good point to bring up, Louis, because this is one of the major misconceptions. This is one of the major smears of both Julian Assange and WikiLeaks, was that, one, they're not journalists, they're not a media operation, in that they're careless, they're reckless. They don't redact sensitive or information that may cause problems to people. There's a thing just actually a month or so ago where Ken Klippenstein, who I like as a journalist, he posted on Twitter the leaked vetting document that the Trump campaign had done on J.D. Vance when vetting him as the vice presidential candidate. And there really wasn't anything in that was really of any surprise, just kind of confirmed some things about Vance. But why Twitter censored Klippenstein about it was because it had J.D. Vance's personal phone numbers, his address is in there, some personal information that really I think most people agree doesn't need to be in the public sphere. Now, you can make the argument in that case with Klippenstein that that information, you can get that information if you just look hard enough on the internet, of course. But I think that's one policy with Twitter, I mean, I guess X, that I kind of actually do agree with, in the sense that, yeah, I mean, it can be pretty clear, I think, well established what information is public and what information can remain private. Somebody's home address, say, right? Somebody's bank account numbers, somebody's personal healthcare information, and so WikiLeaks was always very careful about doing that, about making sure the information it put out there did not include that type of sensitive information. A couple of times that information was exposed, but it was through the actions of organizations outside WikiLeaks, most especially Luke Harding and somebody else at The Guardian, who published the full encryption keys for the WikiLeaks documents relating to the Iraq and Afghan war logs that did allow people to see the redacted information. But again, that wasn't WikiLeaks. That was actually The Guardian that did that. Julian Assange also, too, saw WikiLeaks' role as a service, not as a, so they're publishers, but they are publishing in order to provide information to people, not publishing content for profit, not publishing content for a purpose other than, providing firsthand documentation. And so what we want to do that, and to do that effectively, it was for WikiLeaks to partner with other media organizations. And so you saw that, particularly in 2010, 2011, WikiLeaks working with major corporate media to publish the documents it found. And so when the Iraq war logs, the Afghan war logs come out, it's through the New York Times, it's through the Guardian, it's through El Pais, it's through Der Spiegel, and one other major outlet as well. And so they worked with them, and these organizations asserted WikiLeaks as a journalist, as a media publishing outfit, as journalism. That all changes when the U.S. government comes down on this. When the U.S. government starts going after WikiLeaks, then this corporate media basically throws WikiLeaks under the bus. But you see that both with Assange and WikiLeaks, up until that point where the U.S. government starts going after them, that they're winning all kinds of journalist awards. They're winning all kinds of media awards. Julian Assange is a member of the Australian Journalists Union. But one of the things that they do in order to discredit and to smear WikiLeaks, to try and further their case against them, their persecution and prosecution against Julian and against WikiLeaks, is to discredit them, is to say these aren't real journalists, that these are hackers. And that your question of how do they get the information, WikiLeaks itself does not go and hack into any computers. The way WikiLeaks was operating was that people would bring them the information. So WikiLeaks, someone else obviously had done it before, but WikiLeaks popularized the idea of secure drop boxes on the internet, where people will be able to go anonymously deposit or drop documents that they wanted the world to see. So WikiLeaks was a venue for whistleblowers, most especially the biggest one, of course, being Chelsea Manning. So when Chelsea Manning is taking part in the Iraq War, when Chelsea sees what's occurring in the Iraq War, and Chelsea Manning actually tries to contact American media, including the New York Times, to say, look, I've got all this evidence of war crimes over here. Can I talk to you about it? And the New York Times just blows her off. She goes to WikiLeaks with it. And, so it's always been a system of whistleblowers going to the journalists. And that's something to another point to clear up as well with regards to Julian Assange. He's not a whistleblower. He's a journalist. He's a publisher. And that's why this persecution and prosecution of Assange over these years by the U.S. government, which was a transnational persecution and prosecution, right, was done against a journalist, not against a whistleblower. And that's what was so odious and so insidious and so nefarious, so dangerous, was this idea that they were going after a journalist. And that's the way it was all the time. But in order to do that, they had to claim he wasn't a journalist. But the entire time, we know this because when you finally get to 2024 and the U.S. Justice Department agrees to a plea deal with Assange, and basically that's what they're saying. And within the Justice Department, the understanding is that this is a free speech, free press case, and that we've reached the limit. We can't keep pushing this. We can't keep stringing this along any further. Pushes come to shove in the British courts, and we're going to lose. And so now we make a plea deal with him. So yeah, I mean, so many assets, so many aspects of this, so many sides to this, Louis. I mean, again, you're dealing with something that's 18 years long, and the hardest thing I think when you speak about Assange and WikiLeaks is just peeling through the layers, peeling this onion of lies and smears and misconceptions and half-truths that were deliberately put out there by not just by the U.S. government, but by American and British media in particularly, who disliked Assange for a number of reasons. One of them being is they saw his type of journalism as a threat. Remember, this is the media that is losing throughout those years, 2005, 2010, 2015. Corporate media, the legacy media, the mainstream media is dwindling down. It's diminishing. It's losing its audience. It's losing its market because of, again, this type of technology that you and I are talking on right now. The rise of independent media, the ability of independent media to do the same job and a better job than the legacy mainstream corporate media. So a lot of reasons why they didn't like Julian Assange and WikiLeaks, but a big one was that they saw him and what he represented as a threat to their role, their dominance, their place, in society and in the world.
Yeah, I'm happy later to get into some of the actual leaks and the effect that may have had on the war on terror and perception around the world of the US government and domestically. But for now, just since you mentioned it, how was Julian Assange kind of character assassinated? How was he smeared? How was he treated? Like you said, everyone's trying to make WikiLeaks into this hacker group rather than a service for whistleblowers to then release information, just like the mainstream media does. And as a whistleblower, in the UK and US, you can be charged for passing over military secrets. In the UK, the Official Secrecy Act. He's not a whistleblower. He's not signed that official secrecy, kind of into being, because he's not in the army, he's not in the government. He's no different than the mainstream media. But how was he smeared? We can also discuss the rape allegation from Sweden and things like that. But before we get to that, how was he smeared throughout the years? I know there's mentions he's a Russian agent. He's that. So how was he attacked as a person?
Yeah, I mean, you could whole book length discussion on this in the sense of the gamut they ran through in terms of what they said about him in order, again, to just either diminish him, to make people not like him, to distract from what this is actually about, right? I mean, to make people talk about him as an individual as opposed to the war crimes that he exposed, right? I mean, so very much crisis management, public relations type of tools that, any government, any institution, any organization utilizes when they're confronted with an adversary. And that's what they saw in Julian Assange, with this adversary that they had to destroy and also make an example out of. So the smears and the lies about him, we could talk about that later. These allegations of rape, which were simply not true. There's actually a British parliamentary investigation going on now with regards to the Crown's prosecutorial service and their role in all that, because what occurred in that was an incredible illicit use of government force by the Swedes, by the Brits, the Americans, conspiring to gem up these rape charges in Julian Assange that just simply never existed. There were issues regarding two women that had to do with things other than rape and other than sexual assault, and things that the Swedish prosecutors didn't even see fit to bring, to pay any attention to. And it's only with the involvement of the American government and the British government leaning on the Swedish government that a very senior Swedish prosecutor then gets involved and says, we're going to charge him with this. I mean, and just that whole story itself is something that is quite stunning and quite remarkable. The lengths that with they went to both demonize him and then use these bogus charges in order to try and get him out of Britain so that the Americans could get a hold of him, because the Swedes were willing to do that. But they other things too. He's a Russian agent, as you brought up. This is one that becomes very popular after 2015, 2016, as the Democratic Party in the United States really launches into its Russiagate campaign against Donald Trump and the Republicans. This idea that Russia was the reason Russia hacked the American elections, and this is why Hillary Clinton lost. Of course, at that point in 2016, WikiLeaks had released a whole trove of documents, emails from both Hillary Clinton's campaign and from the Democratic National Committee that really showed how corrupt the Democratic Party was. And so the attention then became, the need became not to have the attention be on the corruption of the Democratic Party, but on the man who released these documents. So this was the purpose of these smears and these lies, was to distract. And then there were just attacks on him individually, that he was a narcissist, that he was in this for profit, that he was a serial liar, that he didn't take showers, that he abused his cat or something like that. I mean, like all these stories that they would throw out there, on a periodical basis, just to keep the conversation going about how bad of a person he was, and to keep the conversation away from the crimes and the corruption that he was exposing. So very standard tactics used, by institutions and organizations and governments against adversaries all the time. So this was to try and actually get to have conversations over this last decade and a half about what WikiLeaks had done and what they had exposed and what they were being persecuted for, was incredibly difficult, because you always had to get through this fog, this blanket, this cloud of just dispersions on Julian Assange, on these direct attacks on him. And then that would then give, the other aspect of it would then give people a reason to pause in their support, or to say, I support what Julian Assange may have been trying to do, but the way he did it was wrong. Or if he hadn't been a Russian asset, this would have been good, but that's tainted by it. This is all kind of fruit from the poison tree, because nothing good can come from someone like this, even if it is all true, right? Or, this allowed particularly media organizations, whether it was organization, like the major American media, like CNN, Washington Post, New York Times, organizations that won awards for publishing the information that WikiLeaks gave them. This was a reason, this was rationale to abandon Assange, to turn against him, to say he doesn't really count as a journalist, or again, what he was doing was nefarious. He had an agenda. He's an agent of a foreign power, on and on and on. And all that was just completely disingenuous. It was lies. It was specious. The Russian thing is particularly egregious in a sense, because WikiLeaks published plenty of documents from Russia that the Russians were unhappy with. Particularly they've published a big file from the FSB, that's Russia's internal security service, essentially showing what similar things as to what Ed Snowden published and revealed about the NSA and the CIA, the United States government spying on its people. The same thing too that WikiLeaks published about the FSB. It's similar to that Assange was somehow a Trump agent. These are all things that have been completely debunked, shown to be false. It's just not true. But you can just even look at things with regards to, say, the day Trump's inaugurated, WikiLeaks puts out a major call for Trump's tax documents. So like the idea that there was a relationship or a collusion or any type of deal between the two, it was just something that was fabricated and made up, and of course debunked by many things, including the Mueller report. Robert Mueller, the special former FBI director, special investigator who looked into Trump's supposed connection with Russia, that report fully debunks the idea that there was a relationship between WikiLeaks and the Trump campaign, or that there was a relationship between WikiLeaks and Russia. There's no evidence whatsoever for either of them, just coincidences and things that people want to point to that actually don't add up to anything. So that's, that's a lot what I just said. And I feel like I only touched, I'm only getting the tip of this, right? I'm only getting the top of the iceberg here in the sense of what this campaign was like, how extensive it was, how robust it was, how massive it was in ensuring that nothing was ever able to be said about WikiLeaks and Julian Assange without a discussion about the character, the motivations, the relationships, all things that, again, were spurious and untrue. But that's what dominates the discussion in the U.S. and Britain for a decade and a half, essentially, as opposed to a discussion about what did WikiLeaks actually demonstrate? Why is the U.S. government so upset with WikiLeaks? Because they exposed, war crimes, lies, things that were embarrassing.
Yeah, it's funny you used the word narcissist. I read a book the other day called Propaganda Blitz. It's by a media group, the people who run it, the authors, Media Lens, and they're British, and it basically focuses on the British media, but the liberal media, so the Guardian, the Independent, BBC, rather than the obvious Telegraph, Times, Rupert Murdoch Press, Sun, things like that. They still mention those, but it's funny where they go through some of the smears on Assange. I can't remember the other figures, but they go through lots of different figures, Snowden and others. And every time the media uses the same thing, calling them narcissists, along with other things, kind of the same playbook, and calling them a narcissist, and trying to basically make it, this guy's not here for the truth. He's not here to help you. It's all about him. He's doing this because he wants to be in the spotlight. He's just a narcissist, he's a big ego and you're just stroking it kind of thing, rather than like, he's just a nice guy or normal guy trying to get the truth out. It's got to be about him and not the documents, the truth. That's just the vehicle for himself. It was just interesting how literally all the media organizations across the board were like, narcissist, this guy's a narcissist, he's doing it, he's a narcissist. And it's like, even if he is a narcissist, like who cares? If he's doing it for himself, he's getting the document. What's more important, the Iraq war logs or propping up someone with a big ego? Let's make it bigger. Maybe he release more. I
mean, but it's effective though. It's effective. So I first spoke out on behalf of WikiLeaks in 2010. Particularly because I was in the Iraq War and what they were publishing needed to be known. Like I appreciate what they are doing for letting people actually know what occurred there. But I was still, it was effective. I mean, it was such a massive campaign of character assassination that even someone like me, who is suspicious of the government, but also in support of a WikiLeaks, wanted to kind of like keep an arm's length to Julian Assange. And then when I was in London in 2014, I had the opportunity to go visit him in the Ecuadorian embassy. And I remember thinking like, oh man, I don't know if I want to do this because like, I don't want to be tainted by being connected to him. I've got a good thing going right now where I'm able to support them on a free speech, free press thing without being connected directly. But I went, and yeah, I mean, you couldn't have been farther from the truth that this guy is this idea that this guy is a narcissist. I mean, just if he's a narcissist, and I don't understand the definition of the term because I mean, it just really was so important for me to have those few hours with him, to see how effective though that type of character assassination is, that type of distraction is, those smears are in terms of influencing people. So it's not only, for someone who was on his side and feeling the pressure from it to not speak as fully as I should have, and I regret that, but not being as fully as I should have, then you can imagine someone who's working at the New York Times or the Washington Post or, the Guardian or wherever, and then the added pressure. All right, the government's upset with you enough. The editors are feeling the heat. The people who run this place don't like WikiLeaks because they're a competitor that's taking our market and they're dangerous to us in the future. And then it's just that thing of like, you really want to align yourself with this guy? Really? You're going to go to bat for this guy? Is this is the hill you want to die on, Julian Assange? I mean, it's very effective, and we have to remind. I mean, I say this about Ed Snowden. When Ed Snowden, same type of assassination occurred of his character, still occurs. All kinds of smears and untruths and lies about Ed, particularly his connection to Russia and everything else. The thing I'd say about Ed was that in the United States, people who were following Ed Snowden, everyone knew that Ed's girlfriend, now the wife and the mother of his kids, but at the time, everyone knew that Ed's girlfriend had been a stripper. Everyone knew that because that's everything that Ed Snowden, his girlfriend's a stripper. I mean, like that's literally had things were said in 2013 or whenever that occurred with Ed. And nobody knew that the guy had joined the army. He had been in training to be special forces, to be a Green Beret. He had broken his leg really badly in the training. He got discharged from the army because of it. And that's how he ends up at the NSA, because he's got security clearance from the army. Nobody knew that was his story. And, it just shows you the way that the media will work with the government so fully and so completely. And this again now, as it gets back to the importance of WikiLeaks, and as you were talking about, say that with John Kerry, Syria, ISIS, them leaving out the most important part, right? The most important part of that story. And so you see all this, whether what they lead out, what they emphasize, and the idea of being able to read the source documentation again yourself. And then there certainly always platforms, always places you can go to read editorials, to read commentary, to hear what so and so or somebody thinks about something. What WikiLeaks was doing was allowing you to go first to the source, read it, and understand it before you get hit with the editorializing, the opinions, the propaganda, etc.
Yeah, and I'd love to, maybe if we do a part two, it'd be great to speak about those conversations you had with Assange. So just going back to what we were speaking about before, just the actual leaks Assange did. Obviously, it really pissed off the American government, the UK government, and other governments around the world. So how much effect do you think those leaks had, maybe around Guantanamo Bay, Afghanistan, Iraq, had on the war on terror and the perception in America? I mean, you can't really speak for the world, but you're living in America, and also being, as you mentioned, you was part of in the State Department around that time of Afghanistan and obviously Iraq before that. How much did that have an effect on the perception in America? And actually, you would have been, when did you finish?
No, I was out by then. And I was I was out by then. I was speaking against the wars by 2010. So, but the idea of what it did a lot of things. These leaks, these releases. One, it provided color to an otherwise black and white story. So you understood what was occurring in Iraq was wrong, that you understand it was built upon lies. You understood that we didn't have the white hats on there. We weren't the good guys. And then you get the details that really clarify that for you. The fact that we were handing over detainees to the Iraqis to be tortured, right? With Afghanistan, things don't seem right there. It seems kind of corrupt, and then you realize with the Afghan, but you're able to read things about how the Afghan vice president is showing up in Dubai with $50 million that came right from the U.S. Fed, U.S. Treasury. So things like that, just different. And there's so many stories like that just gave people the understanding, the details of what was actually happened, defined, what the again, the perceptions were already there, the understanding what was occurring was there, but this really filled in the blanks for people. This provided the color to the black and white sketch, and for other people though, it was revolutionary. It was radicalizing. When I with regards to say the collateral murder video, again, the video of the Apache gunship killing people in Baghdad, I remember being on MSNBC and alongside another veteran, and this was April of 2010, and we were asked about this video. What do you think about this video? And both he and I, our response was, we're shocked that people are shocked. What do you think we were doing over there? But for an American and larger Western audience, seeing the reality of the war in Iraq had really been hidden by them. Hidden to them. You have to remember, in 2010, YouTube was still in its infancy, and smartphones, were really in their infancy. You were on maybe the second iPhone at that point, maybe, I mean, like, so the idea of people having this information in front of them, in a way that we now have, say, with the genocide in Gaza, where we're watching this genocide being live streamed to us, that didn't exist just 14 years ago. And this is a point that Julian Assange made when he spoke at the Council of Europe. His only public statement so far, about a month or so ago, was the difference, what occurred, the revolution in technology and in independent media that has occurred, that in many ways has advanced what WikiLeaks was trying to do, in terms of getting people the raw information, the reality, without the editorializing, without the bias, without the filter in front of them. And so, that for a lot of people, it really was, oh my God, this is what it looks like. This is what's happening over there. A lot of things were exposed that were, of course, crimes. A lot of relationships were upset between the U.S. and other governments because things were made known. And I don't know if anything changed in the sense of the U.S. stopped doing something because of it. But what it definitely did was it further advanced the world's understanding of the American empire as something that cannot be trusted, as something that's dangerous. I think you could make an argument that what we're seeing this past week with the BRICS summit in Russia, where there are 22 heads of state attended, and if they were, and the other people sent their foreign ministers. I mean, this was a big deal. And the list is 9 members. At least 30, I think, now have put in applications or close to that, or will be applying this year. This number of countries that are interested in the 60s or 70s. Aside from that, I mean, you can understand how all this builds, and it's builds. So you're watching the United States and Britain invade Iraq. You're watching them surge in Afghanistan. You know about what's happened in Guantanamo Bay. You're seeing all these sanctions pile up. You see the way that the U.S. empire is incredibly hypocritical, right, to be polite, right, in a sense of how we want to go to war with Iran and we want to sell the Saudis hundreds of billions of dollars. And what's the difference between the two countries? In a sense of, like, you're talking about human rights and everything else. So arguably you can make a point the Saudis are worse, right? Not defending the Iranian regime by any Iranian government by any means, but go anyway. I mean, so a lot of that is what we're talking about here. Just the continue, and then it's just the further, for the American public, the further diminishment of trust in its government, in our government. Why should we believe these people? I mean, there's stuff that's, whether it's the fact that we were training the Egyptian secret police that were torturing people, right? So there's things like that come out, things aside from Iraq and Afghanistan, Guantanamo Bay. There are also embarrassing stories. King Abdullah, the previous king of Saudi Arabia, we know from WikiLeaks, he basically said, if you don't give me all your secrets of Air Force One, because I want my royal plane to be as fancy and as sophisticated and as protected as Air Force One is. If you don't give me what you guys have in Air Force One, I'm not going to buy Boeing planes. I'm going to buy Airbus planes, right? I mean, so you see where a foreign monarch, a foreign king, is shaking down the United States for its highest level secrets in terms of how it protects the president of the United States when he's on an airplane, right? And he shakes us down for it. I mean, there's stuff like that too that exposes. There's plenty of others, but I think that's the most comical one, and the one that's maybe the most tragic, because it's so absurd. But it shows the reality of the corruption that's involved here, of that there's no principles, there's no values involved. It's not even a realpolitik that we're dealing with here. It's just one hand, it's about money, and on the other hand, it's about megalomania. It's about proving your policy right. It's about, as you mentioned before, ensuring that the narrative is always being presented as you want it to be presented. So a lot of things that WikiLeaks does, with their revelations, with their exposures, leads us to this point now. And I don't think you have an understanding of independent media. You don't have the government and mainstream media seeing independent media as a threat as they do now. You don't have world events occurring, particularly the way the world relates itself to the American empire, without WikiLeaks, without Julian Assange, without all the releases, from Guantanamo Bay through the diplomatic gate, through Iran and Afghan war logs, and so forth. So it really, I mean, the importance of it is again, I don't think you could look and say this happened because of it. But certainly when you put it all together in the aggregate, it's incredibly important.
Yeah, I know you got to jump off. I won't rope you in because I know you'd end up answering my question if I asked it anyway. If you're happy to, like you mentioned before, to do a part two, I think we've done a good build up of what WikiLeaks is, about Julian Assange, kind of the beginning of what they released, and then the smear campaign, going from friends with the media or winning the awards to thrown under the bus. He's not a journalist. So I think we built up the picture quite well. So next time we could go into him actually in the embassy, and then Belmarsh prison, his conditions in there, his mental health, the clear lobbying campaign to get him extradited to the US, and then his eventual release, which was a bit of a shock for most people, and seems like probably because of Australia lobbying. Maybe they're like, we're buying all this stuff for AUKUS, we need a win, whatever it may be. We can get into that and your conversations with Assange. Just before we go, just one thing you mentioned there about the Saudis, a good one for WikiLeaks was the State Department leaks where Hillary Clinton's talking about how the Saudis, the Kuwaiti government, all the Gulf monarchies being the number one funders of terrorism, not talking about Iran, and that is the Gulf monarchies. We need them to get to do more. They're funding terrorism and other things like that. But I'll leave it for there. Otherwise, we're just going to end up.
I mean, there's so many. It just popped in my mind. I mean, I'll be better prepared maybe with the list of them. But email, I think it was from Jake Sullivan to Hillary Clinton about the war in Syria, right? Where he says we're on the same side of Al Qaeda. I mean, you have that type of clear messaging between principles, between important people here. The man who's now the National Security Advisor telling the Secretary of State back at that point, who was going to run to be president, that we are on the same side of Al Qaeda. It says it that clearly, and it's okay. They just go along with it.
He actually said Al Qaeda is on our side. That's quite funny, like almost the framing that they're actually kind of working on our side. But yeah, there's loads. I will let you jump off. But yeah, if we can get some more loads around Libya, other things, maybe if there's any about Israel that would go well with today. But oh, there we go. Before the connection went, I'll let you jump off. I know you got another interview, and we'll speak soon. And we'll carry on this story about Assange and up to the plea deal today.
Absolutely. I look forward to it. Thanks, Louis. You have a good one.